We're going to do another flipped lesson. So this is section 3 of chapter 4, solving inequalities using multiplication and division. So you're going to write all of this down in your notebook. Remember, you can pause the video when you need to, and then when you're ready, you move on. If you have questions, you're going to write those down on the side of your notebook. And then tomorrow during class, we're going to do some problems. I don't expect that you know how to do this perfectly. This is just to give you a little bit of background information. So we've done this before, but instead of inequalities, we used an equal sign. So it's very similar to what we've already done. So again, write this down in your notebook. Okay, so also write this down, please. Multiplication and division are inverse operations. So remember, when you're trying to solve for a variable, you're going to use the inverse operation. So if you need to pause the video, and when you're ready to move on, hit play. So key ideas. Multiplication and division properties of inequality. When you multiply or divide by the same positive number, the inequality remains true. Please write that in your notebook. Again, if you need to pause the video, pause the video. So this is important because later on we are going to multiply or divide by a negative number and things will change. So write this down for positive. I'll give you some examples and then we're going to do some negative ones. Okay, so here's case 1. We're using positive numbers. I want to solve, so write this down, if x divided by 5 is less than or equal to negative 3. Again, if I want to solve, I want to use the inverse operation, the opposite of x divided by 5. I'm going to multiply each side times 5. Remember, your 5's will cross cancel, and you're left with x is less than or equal to negative 15. Notice I didn't multiply or divide by any negatives. I just multiplied times 5. So write that in your notebook. If you need to pause the video, pause the video. If you have questions, again, write those down in the side of your notebook and we can answer those tomorrow in class. Okay, you're going to do some on your own. So write all of these down in your notebook. Do one at a time. Please solve it and then please graph it on a number line. Remember, when you graph, you only need to use 3 numbers. But remember, when you're graphing, you graph the answer that you've gotten. So now you should see a text box on the right. You're going to put your answers on in the text box on the right. Okay, so you put your answers on the text box on the right. Now you're going to check your answers. So I should see that you've self-corrected in your notebook the answers to these questions. So I'm just going to quickly graph this first one. So n is less than 3. So remember, I'm going to put 3 in the middle. And these are positive numbers. So I'm just going to go 2, 3, 4. Open circle above the 3. And n has to be less than. So my arrow goes to the left. Number 2, I have m is greater than or equal to negative 5. So my negative numbers, remember my number line goes backwards because it's opposite. I'm going to put an open circle over my negative 5. And I want m to be a number greater than negative 5. Oh, I want a closed circle. I double checked. And there's a line underneath that. So I want a closed circle. So that means I want to include the negative 5. So I darken in that above the negative 5. Here I have p as less than a negative 9 halves. Well, that's going to be hard to graph. So I'm going to make that into a mixed number. So that's negative 4.5. So my scale can be by halves. So I'm going to start with the negative 4.5 in the middle. Smaller than that is negative 4, or I should say bigger than that. Smaller than that is negative 5. I'm going to have an open circle above the negative 4.5. And I want p to be less than that number. So make sure you've checked your answers in your notebook. If you need to pause the video, pause the video. When you're ready to move on, go ahead and move on. Okay, so now we're going to do example 2, solve and graph using division. So please write this in your notebook. Okay, so here we have 7 times y is less than or equal to negative 21. The opposite of 7 times y, the inverse operation would be y divided by 7. Therefore, I'm going to divide each side by 7. And I will get y is less than or equal to negative 3. Okay, and then I want to graph that. So remember to graph that. I'm going to put my negative 3 in the middle, a -2, -4. There's a line under that, so I'm going to darken the circle because I want to include the -3. And y needs to be a number less than that. So make sure that's in your notes. If you need to pause the video, pause the video. When you're ready to move on, go ahead and move on. Now again, you're going to try a bunch on your own. So again, write all these in your notebook. Please do one at a time, leaving plenty of space in between. So you're going to solve them and then graph them, and you're going to enter your answers in the text box on the right, and then we're going to check your answers. All right, so here are your answers. Please check those. And then for graphing, I'm going to count my halves again on that first one. So I have 0, 1/2, 1. You put a closed circle above the 1/2. I want b to be greater than or equal to 1/2. On number 5, I'm going to put a -2, -1, -3. Closed circle over the -2. K needs to be a number less than or equal to -2. And then 6, I have a -6, -5, -7. Open circle above the -6 because there's no line under the sign, and I want Q to be a number greater than that. So make sure you have all those answers in your notebook. If you need to pause the video to fix something, go ahead and do that. Okay, now we're going to look at another key idea. So again, multiplication and division properties of inequality. Write this in your notebook. So if you need to pause the video, pause the video. When you multiply or divide, we already wrote this, by a positive number, the inequality remains 2. But now, when you multiply or divide by a negative number, the direction of the inequality symbol must be reversed for the inequality to remain 2. Because remember, negatives are opposite, so we have to make our sign go the opposite. So if you need to pause the video, and when you're ready to move on, go ahead and hit play. Okay, here's my first example. So I'm going to multiply. So hold on, pause. So we already had this example. So this was when we multiplied by a positive number. So now you're going to write this next one down. So now I have a negative x over 5 is less than or equal to 3. So this is what you're copying down. I need to get rid of that -5. So I'm going to multiply both sides times that -5. So because I'm multiplying times a negative, I'm doing the opposite. I need to flip my sign. So I flipped my sign. Notice these cross cancel. The negatives cross cancel because a negative times a negative is a positive. And I flipped my sign. That's very important. Make sure that you catch that. If you need to pause the video, go ahead and pause the video. When you're ready to move on, go ahead and move on. Okay, so now you're going to do a bunch of these. So you're either going to multiply or divide, or do the inverse operation. So let's look at 7. So remember, you're going to copy these down in your notebook. You're going to leave plenty of space to solve. So here, the first one, you're going to multiply times a -3, so you need to flip the sign. Number 8, you're going to multiply times a -2, so you're going to flip the sign. And number 9, there is no negative on our variable side, so you don't flip the sign. So we don't flip on number 9 because we're not multiplying or dividing times a negative. On 10, you're going to flip. You want to use the inverse operation, so you're probably going to multiply both sides times a -5 over 2. So go ahead and try those. Put those in your notebook. Graph them. Put your answers in the text box on the right. Okay, here's our answers. Check your answers. If you don't have the right answer and you don't know why, circle it, star it. Put something down that you need to look at that. So I'm going to graph this one. I have a 12, 11, a 13. I'm going to put an open circle above my 12. I want x to be a number less than that. Number 8, I'm going to do -1, 0, -2. Closed circle over the -1, and I want y to be less than that or equal to that. Number 9, I'm going to use a -10. Number -9, -11. Closed circle over my -10. I want m to be a less than, boy, I got a lot of lessons. And on number 10, I'm going to use 20, 21, and 19. I want a closed circle above my 20, and I want h to be a number greater than that. So make sure those are corrected in your notebook. If you have questions, write down the question, star it, do something. If you need to pause the video, pause the video. Okay, so now we're going to do somewhere we divide both sides by a negative value. So this one I'm dividing by a -2. Write this in your notebook. If you need to pause the video, pause the video. So if w is greater than or equal to 2.6, again, I'm going to graph that. So remember, my scale for this one is probably going to be by 0.1. So 2.6, 2.7, 2.5. Close circle above the 2.6, and I want w to be greater than or equal to that. So remember, you can pause the video. If you need to rewind to hear what I've said one more time, you can rewind the video. Write this in your notebook. Pause the video if you need to. Okay, these are our last ones. So you're going to write these in your notebook one at a time, solve them, showing all of your work, and then graph them and put your answers in the text box on the right. Pause the video. When you're ready to move on, go ahead and move on. All right, here's our answers again. So I'm going to graph -7, -6, -8. I'm going to have an open circle above my -7. And I want a value greater than that. Here I have 4.5. So again, I'm going to count by 0.1, 4.6, 4.4. Open circle above the 4.5, and I want a value less than that. Here I have -0.9, -0.8, -1.0. Open circle above my -0.9. I want n to be a number less than that. Last one, I have -6, -5, -7. Close circle over the -6, and I want n to be a value less than that. Wow, those were all less, except for the first one. They were all less than. So make sure to correct those. If you have questions, write down the question. And that's it. We'll go over some of these tomorrow in class.